Welcome to today's CPU. It's a little different. We are going to be using this video if we do not have church on Sunday. We're going to make that decision later this afternoon. It is currently Friday, so we're trying to decide. The weather is going to be acting up a little bit, but hopefully we're going to be able to get you this, whether it's in person or not. So today I'm recording the CPU. This is our second CPU on evangelism, the second of 3. So next week will be the last week. So I really wanted to record this because I didn't want to cram all of this week and next week just into 1 week because evangelism is so important. So I really wanted us to be able to hit this heavy. I'll say real quick, the book that we're going to be using and kind of studying through is Sharing Jesus Without Freaking Out by Scott Hildreth and Stephen McKinnon. If you guys are interested in a copy of the book, I would strongly recommend it. Because I only have 3 weeks to teach through this, I'm not hitting everything in the book, so I would strongly encourage you to read it. It is a good read. Now, I have a few questions, and I would like to encourage you, maybe pause the video when I ask these questions and think about them on your own before you continue on. You don't have to, but I'll just encourage you with that. So, as my introduction question today, I want to ask, where is a place that conversations thrive for you? And I'll wait a couple seconds to give you some time to pause and think about it. So for me, conversations thrive in a campfire. If we're having a campfire around, I'll just start sharing personal things that I would never share in other times. A campfire just brings out conversations for me. If my wife, Annabeth, was here, she would probably say a coffee shop. A cup of coffee in her hand just brings out the conversations for her. So you think about it yourself, and we'll jump into today's CPU. So principle number 3 is that gospel conversations are better for everyone. We had principle number 1 and number 2 last week, and this principle this week is that gospel conversations are better for everyone. Now, have you ever had anybody talk to you, and you just know that they're thinking about the next thing that they're going to say before you even finish talking? That person is what I call, and what Stephen McKinnon and Scott Hildreth call, a presenter person. And I have to fight to not be this way. But I'm sure you well know, if you have spoken to these people, that is a taxing conversation. Because oftentimes that person is not ready to receive, but only to give in the conversation. Well, if you remember last week, how I kept talking about how some people view evangelism as more of a sales pitch or a presentation, this week, I want to encourage you and say evangelism is great in conversations. Evangelism is great in conversations. Now, when we're not actually listening to the people that we're talking to, and we're just hoping beyond hope that they end up believing what we tell them, that's not a very useful conversation. If we're just presenting it like a sales pitch, like a presentation, and we're not listening to anything that they have to say, I believe evangelism is less effective. It's still very effective, it definitely can be, but I think less so. Instead of, do you want to buy this thing? Evangelism in conversation says, do you want to know more? There's less monologue and more dialogue. So I have a couple verses for us to read, actually, in John chapter 4 that I'll read, where Jesus sets this example for us in evangelism as a conversation. John 4, verses 9 through 15 say, "The Samaritan woman said to him, 'How is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a woman of Samaria? For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans.' Jesus answered her, 'If you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, "Give me a drink," you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water.' The woman said to him, 'Sir, you have nothing to draw water with, and the well is deep. Where do you get that living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob? He gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did his sons and his livestock.' Jesus said to her, 'Everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again. The water that I will give him will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life.' The woman said to him, 'Sir, give me this water, that I will not be thirsty or have to come here to draw water.'" We see this dialogue that Jesus is having with the Samaritan woman, almost bringing these things up, causing her to draw nearer to him, to ask more questions, to think more, finally to the point that she says, "Give me this water so I will not be thirsty." And then later on in the chapter, when their conversation is still going on in verse 25 and 26, the woman ends up saying, the woman said to him, I know that Messiah is coming, he who is called Christ. When he comes, he will tell us all things. And Jesus said to her, I who speak to you am he. Through this conversation that Jesus was having with the Samaritan woman, he got to eventually share with her that he is the Messiah that is coming. And for us, we get to do the same thing. Through a fruitful conversation, we get to lead that conversation into the gospel, which is why I will repeat that point. Evangelism is great in conversations. I want to talk about this one thing called lifestyle evangelism. Now, when some people hear this term, lifestyle evangelism, they may think of the famous phrase that is, share the gospel, and when you have to, use words. As much as I do think we should model the gospel with our lives, I think this is a totally bogus approach to evangelism. We have to use words. I'll reference Romans chapter 10, verse 14. If you have a Bible with you, I would encourage you to turn there. Romans 10:14 says, here we go. How then will they call on him in whom they have not believed? And how are they to believe in him of whom they have not heard? And how are they to hear without someone preaching? Should we model the gospel with our lives? Absolutely. That's going to be something we talk about next week. But should we also use words to share the gospel? 100% we should. So lifestyle evangelism is this. We should live our lives in such a way that we are enabling gospel conversations to flow through our relationships and our conversations. We're enabling gospel conversations to flow through our relationships and through our conversations. I also want to encourage you, when you think of evangelism, we talked about this last week, you probably view it as a sales pitch or a presentation. I want to just tell you this 5-letter word, relax. Presentations are scary. Public speaking is scary. It's the number one fear in the world. When evangelism is a conversation, the pressure is off. A true conversation has no agenda of where it needs to go. A conversation just simply has two people talking, and wherever they end up, that's great. Both people get to take the driver's seat in the conversation, and even when you're driving, sometimes you don't even know where you're going. That's what a conversation is like. A presentation is one person leading the whole time, knowing exactly the end goal. A conversation is just two friends chasing after whatever the conversation leads. You already have conversations all the time, so don't just stop having conversations. But when you're having them, look for the opportunities to turn it into a spiritual conversation. You'll recognize, especially with experience, when the conversation starts to move in that spiritual direction. In fact, most people in the conversation will recognize when it starts to move into a spiritual conversation. I'll give this example. I was at the dentist yesterday, actually, as of today, on Friday. And while I was there, my dentist was telling me about her life and her husband and how they met. And this led to her sharing that they met in school and that she went to a Catholic school. And then I got to ask her if she grew up Catholic, if she was still Catholic, does she practice any religion at all? And I'm sure that you could see how this conversation could continue to go into a gospel conversation. In all honesty, she had work to do and I was going to be talking like this, you know, how you do at the dentist office. So we couldn't lead that to a gospel conversation. But I just shared that example for you because it's so natural. People want to talk about their own lives. So it's so natural to say, oh yeah, I went to a Catholic school. No, I'm not Catholic anymore. I don't really practice religion. I'm not saying that's what she said, but this conversation is building towards that point. And then I'll give you these 3 helpful tips as you have these conversations. 1, people can tell if you care about them. 2, people can tell if you believe what you're talking about. And 3, people can tell if you practice what you believe. So when you're having these conversations, don't come in with this agenda of really wanting to get the gospel across and you don't really care about what it is that they're saying at all, or even them as an individual. Also, you have to really believe what you're talking about. That means your own personal spiritual state with the Lord, this is something we talked about last week too, is crucial to leading into gospel conversations. You have to make sure that you and the Lord are on correct terms before you go in trying to share Him with others. And then finally, people can tell if you practice what you believe. We'll get into this a little bit more next week, but you have to actually let your actions line up with your words. So as a discussion question at this point, I want to ask, have you ever been in a conversation with someone and you could tell they really don't care about you? How is your current relationship with that person? I imagine it's pretty taxing. I imagine it's not very fun to speak to these people because you know that in reality, they don't care much about you. They only care about talking or, sharing their own lives or whatever it is they might care about. But it is a taxing relationship, if I had to guess. Now, principle number 5. I know I skipped number 4. Again, we only have 3 weeks to teach through this book. So I will once again encourage you, ask me for this book, and Crosspoint here is wonderful to provide this book to you all as students who are asking to read it. But we had to skip number 4 just for the sake of time. But principle number 5 is that the issues that people face are open doors to connect the gospel to them. Philippians chapter 2, verse 4 tells us this, or gives us this perfect example. It says, let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others. The issues people face are open doors to connect the gospel with them. We're called to listen to others' needs, just like we just read in Philippians chapter 2, verse 4. You hopefully can already begin to tell how this lifestyle evangelism is all tying into each other. If evangelism is a conversation, you're much more likely to be listening to the needs of others and to see how the gospel can fit into that. There's this quote from Sharing Jesus Without Freaking Out, the book that we're teaching through, that says, you never need to force people to talk about the things they love. It's not a burden for them to tell you about their families, their jobs, and their various life interests. And I'll share this story with you as an example. I have a Muslim friend still, who really was just a cultural Muslim. And I was speaking to him, and he was complaining to me that he can't get a relationship, and he's very discouraged about it. I proceeded to tell him about my relationship with Annabeth and how when I first tried to date her, I was setting her in the position of God. All of my happiness was dependent upon her and whether or not I got into this relationship, but that the Lord had taught me through that He has to be enough, that Annabeth was not going to be enough for me, but that He alone had to be enough. And he thought this was very interesting, that we could rely on God so heavily as Christians, and then this led to a great gospel conversation. Now, is this because I'm a professional gospel sharer? Absolutely not. Is this because I had my presentation nailed down perfectly? No, it is not. It is simply because I was listening to the needs of others. As our last discussion question, we'll have a closing question at the end, but as our last discussion question, what is one problem that everyone in the world must face, regardless of culture, background, gender, race? You can fill in the blank. What is one problem that every human being in the world has to face? There may be multiple answers to this question, but no doubt about it, one of the answers is this: loss. Whether it be the loss of a friend, of a job, a relationship, even the fear of losing one's own life, everyone has to deal with loss. Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verses 2 through 4 talks about this exact thing. Solomon writes, "Vanity of vanities, says the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever." Solomon writes in Ecclesiastes that everything is vanity, meaning everything fades away. One generation comes and one generation goes. Everyone experiences loss at the end of the day. But there is no problem that is greater than the gospel. There is no problem that is greater than the gospel. Now, what I mean by that is not that everything is fixed as soon as you choose to believe in the gospel. As soon as you choose to make Jesus your Savior, not all problems are fixed. I don't have to tell you that. I'm sure you know that well. But while everything else in the world fades away, the gospel stands forever. We're offered eternal life, and nothing else can offer it. Christ alone is the one who is the word of life. So while not all problems are fixed, no problem is greater than the eternity offered by the gospel. The last verse that I have to share with you here today is in Romans chapter 8, verse 18. It says, "For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us." The sufferings that we go through now are not worth comparing. So while the gospel does not take away all of the sufferings that we have, it's not even worth comparing to the glory that is to come. And when you listen to the needs of others, when evangelism is a conversation and you're constantly listening to the needs that other people have, you get to share with them a verse exactly like Romans 8:18, where no, not all your problems go away, but that it's not even worth comparing to the future glory that we will have because of the salvation that Jesus Christ offers. There's no suffering that can compare to the glory offered in Jesus. Timothy Keller says this: "This is true," regarding pretty much what I just said. "This is true not because the spiritual is more important than the physical, but because the eternal is more important than the temporal. If there is a God, and if life with Him for eternity is based on having a saving relationship with Him, then the most loving thing that anyone can do for their neighbor is help him or her to a saving faith in that God." I love that he says, this is true not because the spiritual is more important than the physical. He's thinking in the mind of a secular person who might not think the spiritual matters any more than the physical does. So he says, he's making a defense here really for the gospel. This is true not because the spiritual is more important than the physical, but because the eternal is more important than the temporal. Anyone, whether they're secular or not, could agree with that statement. If something's going to affect me for the rest of eternity, or it's only going to affect me for my lifetime, anyone can logically say the eternity matters much more. So that's what Tim Keller gets at here. If there is a God, and if life with Him for eternity is based on having a saving relationship with Him, then the most loving thing anyone can do for their neighbor is to help him or her to a saving faith. Now, you can see how the gospel connects to the needs of others, and that the gospel listens to the needs of others. And I'll repeat that final principle: the issues that people face are open doors to connect the gospel to them. Everyone faces the issue of loss. Everyone faces many issues, but no issue, no problem is greater than the gospel. So as my closing question now today, I want to ask you, just as kind of food for thought, we see how the gospel affects our own eternity. How does the gospel reconcile the issue of losing others? So think about that today. We can come back next week, actually, and even talk about that in CPU. But I appreciate you tuning in for this video. I know that this was a little different, but I hope that it was benefiting to you. And I hope that you stay warm during this cold weather, and we will catch you guys next week. Thanks so much. Bye.